Chronicle 1, Hope and Decay. Prologue. I was there the day Dahlia slew a demon. I was young then. I had been assigned to Sister Superior Dahlia's retinue by happenstance, nothing more than a warrior fresh from training at the convent. Instantly, though, I felt connected to her. Confident, strong-willed, loyal and full of faith, she embodied what every sister aspired to be. Throughout our initial conflicts, our unit was unstoppable under Dahlia's leadership. We exterminated hidden Xenos hives, burned demon-worshipping cults, and kindled the God Queen's light on every planet we stepped on. During the 4th year under Sister Dahlia, we encountered our first Havoc brothers while accompanying a detachment from the Human Defense Force. Retrospectively, we know that they were followers of the War God. Back then, all we saw was the hulking masses of 3 red giants, clad in old power armour and faster than any creature should be. Collectively, they executed dozens of military infantry before anyone could react. Admittedly, I was terrified. My years of training were inconsequential in the face of unbridled chaos. Dahlia, however, seemed even more level-headed than usual. As they grew closer, she barked out orders for my fellow sisters and I to arrange a V firing formation behind her. Dahlia, at the head of the position, never took her eyes off the savages. With her unique pistol locked squarely at the leading brute, she shouted a prayer and fired a shot mere moments before he would have dealt a lethal blow to our Sister Superior. The shot projected a white-hot burst directly into the oncomer's unprotected face, resulting in an instantaneous disintegration of his skull. The momentum-driven body fell limp and skidded to Dahlia's feet. In response to our leader's attack, the 8 other sisters comprising our unit and I unleashed round after round of holy bullets and promethium flame at the remaining 2 monsters who met a similar fate to their partner. Having now seen and handled such a foe, I believed wholeheartedly that our squad would be instrumental in loosening the grip that Havoc had on humanity in the Sirius sector. And I have never been more right. 2 years after our encounter with the followers of war, we were called to battle against a force of Havoc brothers we call the Plague Disciples, disease-ridden husks of former battle brothers that infect any world they embark upon. Atom 9, a small agriculture world that consistently fed the neighbouring planets with necessary imports, was the target of their latest corruption. A commandery of nearly 90 sisters from our convent prepared to unleash retribution against the mutated beings with the help of military regiments stationed on Atom 9. I was filled with holy vengeance, ready for the encounter at hand. Dahlia, as resolved as ever, guided our unit in prayer and song, leading up to the descent into battle. Only one word could describe what we saw as we dropped: mayhem. There were hundreds of Defence Force personnel outnumbered in melee against animated, smiling corpses. Hulking, armoured enemies, covered in thick layers of filth, dotted the commotion, firing rounds of living pestilence out of antique rifles and swiping through entire groups of guardsmen with unearthly weapons. Blood and decay ran wet under every foot, bubbling and turning ugly colours as the poisonous aura of the Havoc brothers crept along our lines. Yet we were unmoved. I had grown in my faith considerably since our dealings with the War Disciples, leaning on the God Queen who had shielded us time and time again through the years. Our unit marched forward, raining bullets, fire and plasma upon the false god-enhanced monsters and their undead puppets. I watched fellow squads stand their ground against our enemy, unflinching whilst maladies spread over their armour as the Plague Disciples drew closer. Then I watched them die. Some were torn apart by toxic rounds, while others were split open by unholy virulent blades. Some writhed from internal plagues, no doubt caused by the miasma surrounding our enemies. One by one our numbers fell. 6 sisters in my own unit met varied demises throughout the altercation, each one more gut-wrenching than the last. Righteous fury boiled in my veins. I could tell Dahlia was affected too, her steel resolve turning to absolute rage. The God Queen's wrath burned hot in our bodies as our guns shredded whatever crossed our path. The 4 of us that remained focused our assault on one target at a time, ensuring its destruction before moving on to the next. We sisters that endured with the Defence Force soldiers still alive seemed to be turning the tide. As mobs of bloated bodies began piling up, our ranged weapons were able to keep our adversaries at bay during any attempts to climb the corpse walls. We felt the blessed assurance of victory seeping into our hearts, and we fought even harder. That is, until a sound like a splitting glacier crackled loudly over the cacophony of war, and a tear in reality made way for a true monstrosity. It was the height of two battle brothers, gaunt and sickly, with insectoid wings sprouting from its back. One arm wielded a blade that could cleave through a tank, whilst the other was absent. In its place, an entirely different creature existed, protruding from the main body with its own torso, arms and head. The talons at its feet tapped the ground while its wings flapped furiously to keep its large frame airborne. With a sharp-toothed grin, it surveyed the carnage that surrounded it. A demon. Terror overtook me, and I couldn't look away from the fiend, entranced by a grotesque sense of dread. Dahlia, however, seemed to regain her resolve at the grand entrance of this new foe. She snapped my attention away from the behemoth and ordered our unit to regroup behind a broken wall. While catching our breath, Dahlia looked each one of us squarely in the eye and quoted a battle prayer. "From the begetting of demons," she started, pausing for us to finish the line. "God, Queen, deliver us," we completed in unison, sharing a smile and the warmth of faith. Without another word, Dahlia leapt from behind the ruins, sprinting directly towards the hovering giant. Surprised, I shouted after her, taking several strides in her wake, but her speed was supernatural. She rushed past the front line of defence and scaled the cadaver partition with ease, taking shots of enemy heavy weapon fire that should have killed someone 100 times over. And yet she moved unhindered. Closing the distance to her target with inhuman haste, Dahlia discharged blistering plasma in an unending supply from her shred pistol. Each press of the trigger melted whatever victim happened to be at the end of the barrel. The look of shock on the demon's face is one I will never forget, its wretched features distorting into a challenging snarl. It readied its hell sword for a lethal swipe as Dahlia came nearly upon it, drawing her own blade. However, where the devilish hell sword looked crude and poxmarked with corruption, Dahlia's was pristine and covered with glowing inscriptions, shining like a beacon of hope. The flurry of blows that followed were nigh impossible to perceive. The demon squelched and spat bubbling contagions as wounds began to open over its body. And yet Dahlia was untouched. The next moment a horrendous outcry of otherworldly voices screeched through the air. The beast fell with Dahlia atop it, her blade plunged deep into the monster's chest. Hitting the ground, she gave her own thunderous yell that sent a shockwave of pure energy across the battlefield. Dozens of persistent living corpses crumpled to the floor, motionless, as the force reached them. The Havoc brothers that remained began to implode in on themselves, leaving behind pools of putrefaction. No other words could convey what had happened. We witnessed a miracle. The God Queen had blessed Sister Superior Dahlia, granting her extraordinary gifts to bring victory over these abominations, as an example to all those who stood against humanity. I watched as Dahlia stood, removed her helmet and looked back at me. Even from this distance, I could feel her smile of reassurance. Then in an instant she fell. I ran to her, tearing off my helmet with no thought to the potential noxious threat still lingering on the battlefield. I expected to find our weary leader exhausted from the exertion of her conflict, but otherwise unscathed. What I saw instead was a body covered in wounds that could not exist on a person that had done what she did. Bullet rounds had punched craters in vital areas of her chest and limbs. Infections turned her skin sickly black where her skin was exposed. Lacerations as thick as an arm cleaved nearly all the way through several portions of her body. And yet Dahlia smiled her familiar, gracious smile up at me. Unable to move, unable to speak, she darted her eyes down towards her hand, intending for me to follow. Her shred pistol was still intact, despite the rigour of war. I looked at her, knowing what this meant. I nodded, clasped the unique firearm and freed it from her grip. With my focus drawn solely on Dahlia, I hadn't realised the absence of Fita. What should have had the stench of 1,000 deliquescing bodies instead smelled like nothing. I noticed then the gasps from behind me and loud prayers of thanksgiving to the God Queen. As I turned, I saw why. Flowers, some reaching hip height, sprouted and bloomed over the destruction in shades of purple, pink and white. But not just any type of flower. These were a Terran dicot flower of the Asteraceae family of plants known as dahlias. I watched as the blossoming tide stretched from the far reaches of war towards me, growing in seconds right before my eyes. I redirected my gaze back to Dahlia. She blinked once, then closed her eyes, never dropping her smile as the flowers grew from every part of her uncovered skin. The taint of the plague disciples had been miraculously wiped clean from the act of this faithful daughter of the God Queen. I fortified myself, said a prayer over my fallen leader and fellow warriors, and rose. Shred pistol in hand, I went to the energy sword now sticking out of a bed of flowers, any remnant of horror unnoticeable underneath. The inscriptions were gone and the ethereal glow had subsided. It looked like a standard issue weapon used by all Sister Superiors. But I knew it was so much more. I knew its legacy. After the events of that day, I petitioned to lead my remaining unit of sisters under a new order in honour of Dahlia, the Order of the Hallowed Bloom. What started as a group of 3 has now grown to well over 100 strong. As Cannoness over this commandery, I could not be more proud of what we have accomplished. We will not stop. We will not falter. We will not allow the Havoc gods and their followers to taint this galaxy. We will strive to unite humanity in the Sirius sector with every deed until our dying breath, as Dahlia did. And we will do it with faith unending. For the God Queen. Presentation by Cannoness Commander Marida Carthrax during the commemoration of the God Queen.